So today we're going to be looking at species habitat models or species distribution models, and all this information is available on the website. So we have a lab handout that's going to have a PowerPoint and an assignment that I've adapted from OSU NOAA's Geo 580 lab. They did some interesting work with marine habitats, and if you go onto the Southwestern GIS blog and look under the Lab 9 SDM, you'll find a zip file that contains all this information, including the GIS MXD that we'll be using, plus all the GIS data, and of course the handout and PowerPoint. So today we're going to be looking at GIS analysis of this model, of species habitat models. So we're going to introduce GIS analysis models in general, creating marine habitat parameter guides, and creating a binary ranking and suitability model. These are two different types of modeling that we're going to do. And finally, we're going to look at ArcGIS Model Builder and how we can use Model Builder to automate what we will do our work with. So what is a GIS analysis model? So a GIS analysis model is basically a few steps and functions that we're going to use in our GIS platform to analyze some kind of real-world event. So well, there's different ways we can do this modeling with, there's the binary, which is a boolean. Think zeros and ones, think computers, true or false, the way the computer language is written. Ranking model would be something where we add different layers together to find the most suitable, kind of give you a gradation of suitabilities. And then there's rating models and weighted models, which we're not going to look at too much today, but I want you to know there are multiple models existing, not just the two that we're going to look at. Basically, analysis models are going to involve taking grids and doing math on them the same way we were doing with the Raster Calculator and raster analysis. We take a bunch of rasters and we're going to do math on that to determine habitat suitabilities. So basically, we all remember what the grid structure, data structure is. It's a raster where each individual pixels can represent a numerical value that can mean some kind of terrain parameter, for example, or some natural value. You can see here that we also can store no data in some of these in order not to deal with the squares, not to have a completely rectangular view, and we'll see that later in our GIS data that we. So for example, here is near San Antonio, Texas, and this is a grid data set that you can see here has numerical values for each pixels. Whenever we zoom in on it, you can see that they're just little squares with different values. These values can be soil types, they can be amounts of rainfall, it can be temperatures, it can be any kind of continuous information. It can be stored like this. So basically we take grid number 1 with grid number 2. We can do some kind of math like add it, and then we're going to get an output grid. So for example, this red cell here, if we had a value of 3 and 2 and we added them together, we'd get a value of 5. And this is kind of how our analysis works. We take these different raster GISs and data layers, and we just add them together, and then we evaluate what the output grid looks like. So like today, what we're going to be looking at is bathymetry data, and we're going to use that to do some different kinds of calculations, which are going to give us different informations about the underwater environment. So we could find out the different kinds of slopes, or we're going to look at different types of classifying different objects about the terrain, like Regazzi D, and we're going to use these different kinds of information from this raw data. We're going to turn this into information. We're going to use these informations to evaluate the habitat. So the benthic terrain classification is a tool that that you can download here from the from this website, and I've already used. So I've already taken these tools and did the kind of legwork for you, so you don't have to go through this process to make these different informations from the raw data. But just be aware that's how these raw data systems were made. So out of the 3 output grids that are interesting to us is the bathymetric position index, which we're calling this the BPI, at different scales, and then the slope of the landscapes and the rugosity. And then we're going to look at these three different characteristics of our terrain and plug them into our different kinds of model algorithms to find habitat suitabilities for different species. So BPI is interesting because it measures the reference location, how it is relative to the location surrounding it. So it measures where that point is in the overall landscape or seascape. So it kind of looks at it more of a local effect, so the local topography, the way it is. So, and that's very useful for landscape ecology studies whenever we look at that in above water in topographic position indexes. But since this is underwater, we're calling it bathymetry position indexes. So what we're seeing here is that many of our physical biological processes that happen on the Earth are related to the topography, or in this case bathymetry, of the particular position. But just because you might be high in a high elevation or at some place on the surface of the Earth, what really matters is how high you are relative to your surroundings, not just how high you are. You can be on a plateau and it feels like you're on a flat part of the Earth even though you have a high elevation. So what we do with the bathymetry position index is that we look at each individual cell and relate it to its surroundings and give it an index saying how much higher it is to compare to its other neighborhood. So this is just using this neighborhood analysis and saying, okay, well, this in relation to the neighborhood is so much higher. And you can see here, for example, this one has a value of 2, showing that it's higher than its surroundings. Something like 0.5 will show that it's low, that it's not as high as surroundings. And this gives you a better idea than giving these raw elevation values. So a positive BPI value denotes a feature is higher than the surrounding area. For example, ridges. A negative value denotes a feature is lower than surrounding areas, like a valley. So, and then BPI near 0 means that it's flat in that area. And you can kind of see here some examples of what BPIs would look like. So for example, if you were on this top of this ridge right here and you did the neighborhood analysis, you would have a higher value because the mean elevation of the neighborhood will be below the point it's at. And you can see here in the valley the same kind of thing. They take the mean elevation, here's the line, and then you get the point below. So then this would have a negative value. So this is very important for habitat suitabilities because sometimes certain species might take advantage of their topography to live in certain areas that might protect them from predators. So here, and then another thing that's also interesting about terrain is the rugosity, which is a measure of how rough or bumpy a particular terrain is. In a way, it's measuring roughness. So we're taking these values here, like for example, here's raw elevation data. We're going to plug it through our calculator, and we're going to get a roughness coefficient, a rugosity parameter. And this will be one of the other parameters that we'll be using in a model. So today we're going to take those 3 parameters and we're going to use that to find Nemo. That's what we're doing with our species distribution modeling. We're going to try to map out the habitat that these benthic fishes, or what are known as ground fishes, or pretty much what's known like Nemo, are found in the ocean. So you can understand how this can have some impact on conservation. So today's lab, we're going to build an analysis model that will represent the benthic environments for offshore in Central California and Caramel Bay. And what we want to do is evaluate this marine protected area. And there's a certain area based off of regulation that you can't fish in. So there was different transects done by remotely operated vehicles that surveyed the bathymetry, and then the benthic terrain model builder was used to make these different parameters that we're going to use in our model today. And of course, BTM is a collection of tools in ArcGIS that we use for marine or coastal resource managers. You can get those tools available in the zip file, or you can go to the website made by OSU. What we're going to do is take the outputs of these tools to make a binary model and a ranking model. We're going to compare those two to see how that impacts our habitat suitability analysis, and we'll compare those two models. So anytime you're making a model, you need to say, are we asking the right questions, and do we have the right data to answer these questions? And then specifically, do we have the accuracy and resolution of that data to meet the demands? And then since we're not actually dealing with real world environment, we're dealing with a model. We have to make sure our model represents the real world well. So do we have like a kind of a scientific understanding to the processes that are taking place in our model? So what we're going to use today is that we're going to try to map out essential fish habitats. So the Sustainable Fisheries Act of 1996 is a law that governs and manages the marine fisheries in the United States. And there's these things called essential fish habitats, which are bodies of water and substrate, what's going on underneath the water, that's required for fish spawning and breeding and feeding. So the idea is that to have a healthy fish habitat that we can take advantage of and harvest for fish in the supermarket, we need to protect particular crucial habitats in order to the fish to respawn, and this is our sustainable solution so we can keep on having fish to fish. And these habitats, we want to protect them because they're essential for these fisheries to exist, so this ecosystem to thrive. So we don't mind fishing some parts of the ocean or offshore, but we don't want to fish indiscriminately, or we have a chance of killing off our fish populations and not having that resource available. So what areas of land can we protect to promote fish habitats? And you can see here's the parameters that are very important for Nemo to reproduce. Water depth, the sediment depth, the substrate type, sediment type, exposure, rugosity, which we calculated slope, and then water chemistry, water temperature, caverns, voids, so a lot of those valleys are interesting, vegetation, biotic interactions, and of course anthropogenic factors, and this is going to be like man-made impacts on the environment. So what can we measure here directly to interpret and make our models? Of course we can't model every single parameter, but we're going to try to model as many parameters that are most important in order to map our fish habitat. So first we ask what type of data is available. We see we have depth multi-beams that makes little points, XYZ data points, and we can turn those into grids. So we have this bathymetry available. We have sonars, and of course we have our ROVs that are doing transects, these unmanned vehicles that are remotely controlled. With our multi-beam, we can make our bathymetric, which we can get our slope, aspect, hill shades, rugosity, and BPIs, which are all the different parameters that we can use. These other informations here, we can derive the same kind of imagery, and maybe we can interpret the imagery to see vegetation, what kind of seafloor cover there is it hard, soft? Maybe we can interpret the different kinds of dirts available. And then we have, of course, our transects and observations. So this is kind of like our field work, but this is what we're going to be using in our computer models, the bathymetry grid depth. So here's our 4 different data sets: the depth, the slope, the aspect, which is like the direction of where the slope faces, and then the substrate type, hard, mixed, and soft. These are the parameters we're going to use in our model. So, so the parameters that are important for benthic fishes species is the bathymetric position index, the BPI, which is the measure that we talked about earlier, which is the relative to the location surrounding it, like what kind of landform it is, how high it is compared. Then we have our rugosity, which is going to be the roughness, the bumpiness of the sea floor, and we can look here at this bumpy factor to kind of say, oh, that's where the caves and grooves are for the fish to hide. So we have to ask these questions like, what do we know about our species habitats? Can we describe these habitats? Yes, we can. We have the bathymetric data, and we can use that to describe these different habitat requirements like rugosity, aspect, slopes. Do we have enough information to properly model? In this case, we do. If that information hasn't been collected, then we might not be able to even do this model. Is it the right scale? Is it high enough resolution for us to make meaningful models? And then does the model work? Maybe some kind of field verification to test. Does that model work? So here's the ROV, remote controlled vehicle, that goes out and collects the data for us. And you can see here, this is what's going to go out and validate some of our GIS models. The question we're asking is like, where's the fish? We're taking the bathymetry grid. We're using that to calculate our different model parameters. Then we're going out and using these side scanners to also make this other preferred substrate grid. So afterwards we get 4 grids that we're going to use to make our preferred habitats and model where our species is. Then we're going to want to validate the GIS analysis in the field by sending out one of these like ROVs to record the observations. Do we find fish in these particular places? In order to say, well, our model's working or not working. So there's different types of GIS models. We have the binary model, the ranking model, the rating model, the weighted rating model. There's ways that you can modify these different kinds of models, and there's thousands of different types of models you can do. It's almost limitless on how you can modify these, but we're going to do a simple binary and ranking model today. So for example, a binary model is kind of that true-false, where 0 is false and 1 is true. So 0 is going to be a value that doesn't meet the parameters, and 1 does. So what we'll do is say, for example, rugosity needs to be greater than 1.2, and we're going to say, okay, that's true at 1 here and false here at 0. Then we're going to make a grid like that. Then we're going to say over here, the BPI is also very important. BPI should be greater than 1.5 standard deviations, and we're going to go and do that, and we're going to make true or false. And then what we do is we multiply these two rasters together to find out an area that satisfies both. If there's a, for example, here where it's 1 but it's 0, you're going to end up getting 0 because 1 times 0 is 0. What you get here is the ideal habitat. This habitat meets all criteria. That's going to be binary model. Ranking model is going to add different parameters. So you can see here rugosity is greater than 1.2 standard deviations. We say that's true. We get, of course, again, true or false, 1 or 0. Here we have BPI greater than 1.5 standard deviations, true or false, 1 and 0. But we're going to add those two things together, and what we end up with is 2 being the best habitat, 1 being okay habitat, 0 being not suitable habitat. So then we can get a range of habitat values. This is where we have multiple parameters where not all parameters have to be met. Rating models kind of work the same, but you're going to divide by the number of parameters you have to get a simple average. This way you can have all your values between 0 and 1, and where 1 is the best and 0 is not. This is something that you can use in order to have a simpler communication of the different values, so based off of rating. And then you have weighted averages. So if you had some parameters that were more important than other parameters, you can say, okay, the rugosity is very important, so I'm going to multiply it by 5, while the BPI is not as important. So I'm just going to leave it alone and add those together. This is with the weighted averages, so that we're averaging this at a higher weight, so it's more important. So this is saying that all parameters are equal to each other. So you'll get different results based off of different models. For example, here's binary model. You're going to be the most conservative model, while ranking and rating or weighted modeling will give you more of a gradation, maybe a better understanding of how the complexity of the habitat. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to use your model for. So this is where we're going to actually start getting into some GIS, and I'll make a second video that I'll share with you for that part. So stay tuned for part 2.